Today on Locked On Red Wings, 7 Mo years from Moritz Seider.
You're Locked On Red Wings, your daily podcast on the Detroit Red Wings. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
I had X Mo years loaded up for like 3 or 4 days.
Unbelievable.
You know what's funny is I thought for sure the Red Wings would run with that, and they decided to go with Motown, and I was like, oh, this is mine. I got this.
This is mine.
It's mine
you didn't
now.
even tell me that. That was the first time I have heard that. That was right then.
That's why
everybody. That's why I laughed immediately. That was something.
Welcome back to the Locked On Red Wings podcast. We are your hosts, Brian Fisher and Scotty Bentley. I'm a color commentator for the Oakland University hockey team. Well, Scotty's the host over at Locked On Tigers, who are tied for the final wild card spot. Normally, we would riff about that, but we have some very big news to discuss today, so we'll let Scotty talk all about that on his own show, Locked On Tigers. He's also a freelance journalist for the Detroit News. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com today to get started. And I want to thank you guys for making Locked On Red Wings your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, and of course here on YouTube. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And Scotty, what a way to end the week. And thankfully, hey, this came in the middle of the day today, so we didn't have to worry about having to throw away a recording. Ken Kyle got his time to shine yesterday. Yep. I didn't have to delay that. Moritz Seider signed to a 7-year deal that's going to pay him $8.55 million per year for the next 7 years. And I think it has a 10-team no-trade clause during years 4 through 7 as well.
Yeah. 5 through 7, something like that.
5 through 7, something along those lines. I can double check on that real quick. But before I get to that, Scotty, I just want to ask you, like, as I did with Berggren and as I did with Raymond, like, what are your thoughts on this contract in terms of length and dollar amount?
That was a big sigh of relief. Was just and not because there was ever even a remote, shadow of a doubt that they weren't going to get a deal done, right? That this was always going to happen. They were always going to get a deal done. But I'm glad it was 7 years. I really am. And a point that I think is so fantastic that I saw Boltman also make online, and I think I saw a few other people point it out as well, is that having Seider and Raymond not exactly line up contract-wise is actually could be kind of construed as a good thing, right? Not having two of your most expensive players come off the books the same offseason. Now, the flip side of that coin is Larkin ends the same time that Seider does now, right? He signed an 8-year last year, so you're still lined up with him. But Larkin is, I don't know, Larkin almost transcends it's all right, they'll extend him probably. I don't know if that's going to be too much of a worry, we're down to the wire and, unless he falls off a cliff. But anyway, that's way too far ahead of myself there. I think it's awesome that they got it done for 7. I'm thrilled with 7. Obviously, perfect world. I would have preferred 8. All of that being said, but I have zero issue with a 7-year deal. 8.5. My guess is that if they wanted 8, it would have cost them more than what the Wings had in the salary cap. That's my guess. And so it was either you take 7 and you can get in just under the cap this year, or they would have had to go over this 8.74 that they had available in cap, which I'm not sure they were going to be able to do that and Raymond, clearly. So I have zero issue with this. I'm thrilled that for the next 7 years, we do not have to worry about any of the 3 biggest pieces probably of this core going anywhere.
Well, couple things, and I do want to talk about the Larkin thing, I think, first and foremost. But as far as that, the 8th year would have sent them over we talked about the internal cap structure the other day and how they want to keep all the players underneath Larkin's 8.7, which is why they are this was I think it was a Craig Button Chris Johnson report where he said that they were thinking about shaving years off to get him back under that number. But I mean, the 8.7, that's also how much you had left in the cap. So internal cap or real cap, you could not go over that number without having surgery done to this roster, which, I mean, I'm pretty convinced surgery is going to be done to this roster regardless, just because of the way it's set. But like, you have to, I think that number, as is with Larkin, was the number that they were looking at. And when it comes to like linking up with Larkin, because I mentioned that too before I even saw the Boltman post, I was like, there is value in the fact that Raymond and Seider are now no longer synced up and when they need new contracts, because every offseason, your cap space is going to be different. So 1 year after you re-sign Seider, presumably at the end of this deal, you'll have more cap space to then extend Raymond. And that's when it was pointed out to me by Max that, Dylan Larkin, Max's tweet that is, Dylan Larkin is now synced up with Seider. But that's a different situation because Moritz Seider is going to be, Dylan Larkin's going to be 34 when that contract expires. Moritz Seider is going to be, 30? So, like, they're going to be, presumably, and some players have incredibly long primes, right? Like, you look at Alex Ovechkin, not saying Larkin is Alex Ovechkin and how, primes can be extended for so long, but just as an example, that's not every player falls off the moment they hit like 32. But because there's that few year age gap, like the next contract that Larkin might be going after might not be of the same caliber that the next contract Seider will be going after. Sure. So it'll be easier to maneuver, I imagine, than having to then again sign Raymond and Seider in the same year.
Also, the cap's going to keep going up, man.
Right.
It's worth reiterating as often as we have. The cap is just going to keep going up and up and up and up.
Right. And then as far as like Seider's contract itself goes, I mean, I think we were speculating, right? Like between 8.3 and 8.7, I think I said the other day is where I expect him to fall. He came in at 8.55 million, which I think is like smack dab. I think it's a great deal for Seider. He's getting paid what he deserves, but it's also a great deal for Yzerman where he's not overpaying a guy either. Like, I think Moritz Seider very much got the money he deserved, and I agree with you that clearly this means that 8 number would have put him at Larkin's, if not a little bit above Dylan Larkin's number. And I do think as well, if you look at the contracts that were signed in the recent years, Owen Power, I think is getting paid 8.3. In fact, I have it up right here. Owen Power got 8.35. Jake Sanderson got a hair over $8 million. And we talked about it when those contracts are signed. Like, do these reset the market and push Seider higher? Because Seider has just as much, if not more, experience while getting a much tougher workload than both those guys. Answer to that clearly was yes. Because now Moritz Seider is the 13th highest paid defenseman in the NHL by AAV alone, by cap hit alone, rather. But I think it's incredible that he's not top 10, right? Like, considering what he is to this organization. He's 23 years old. He had the toughest by a substantial margin in difficulty of deployment last year. Like, he was the toughest guy. Like, in fact, I'm going to pull it up and show you guys because I have it. I got to share screen. It's always so difficult with me. So, like, right here, you're looking at it. Like, this is the difficulty of usage for Moritz Seider last year, and I'll zoom in so you guys can see it a little bit easier. You see almost every player, this is all defensemen in the NHL that played a game last year. And they're all mostly in this huge blurb, right? This is what I would call the within reason margin. Where, like, all these players have different roles, so they play different levels of competition, top pair, bottom pair, offensive-oriented, defensive-oriented, and then all the way to the top you have Moritz Seider. And the fact that there's any degree of separation where you can see the white between Moritz Seider and the next player down, which is, I think this is Jake Wallman. Jake Wallman, who was his partner, who has his second most difficult quality of competition last year, is insane to me. Now, I understand, like, Brandon Carlo here, because the y-axis on this is, like, difficulty of competition, and then Brandon Carlo had a ridiculous 22.65% of offensive zone starts. So that means he was getting, 78% defensive zone starts? That's absolutely asinine too, considering he played 1,200 minutes last year. But Seider is clearing away the toughest competition of any player, of any defenseman in the NHL last year. And the Red Wings at 23 years old locked him up, a true number one defenseman who can play a two-way style of game in the NHL in 2024. Because that's the thing, too, is like a lot of the defensemen you see on this list above him are offensive-oriented defensemen. You have Erik Karlsson, Rasmus Dahlin, Zach Werenski, he's pretty two-way. Adam Fox is on here. So Cale Makar is on here. Like, you got a bunch of offensive-oriented defensemen who are getting paid way more because they put up points, but that doesn't mean Seider's bad at putting up points. He put up 42 points last year, playing second power play unit minutes and playing against the toughest competition every team had to offer, more than any other team in the NHL. And they locked that guy up at age 23 for 7 years at $8.5 million for the 13th highest paid, not even top 10. That is a tidy bit of work by Steve Yzerman. It really is.
Absolutely agree, man. And that's only, as we talked about back in May when these, conversations first started, that's a number that as the cap continues to grow is only going to look more and more favorable for the Wings. The only reason that, well, not the only reason, but one of the reasons why Seider takes that is because he's getting drastically, I don't even want to use the word overpaid because that's not what I'm trying to like get across. But because he is still of RFA status, the Wings don't have to pay him $8.5 million right now, right? They could just, we have our team control. We're going to keep him around, whatever. But now he gets paid what he is worth now instead of having to wait until he's a UFA to get his big contract. And then by the end, now you're talking about instead of playing that waiting game for him, he's just getting what he's worth throughout the rest of it. And again, as the cap goes up, the Wings will continue to only have this deal look better and better.
Right, and we'll talk too, like, obviously he's 23 and we're expecting him to grow even more. Like, we'll talk a little bit about what our expectations for Seider are now that he is on this long-term extension on the other side of this break. So stay tuned to segment 2 of Locked On Red Wings. Got to talk to you guys today about Game Time. Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluffs to show you only incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. And you can use curation to make it easier to save more on sports, comedy, concert, theater, so much more using Game Time Picks. They also offer you the all-in pricing toggle that if you turn on, it'll show you all the prices up front with no surprise fees at checkout, and get a panoramic view of your seat before you buy using Seat Views. And that Game Time ticket package coverage package means that your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKDOWNNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKDOWNNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. Segment 2, Locked On Red Wings podcast, and the Red Wings have the 3 biggest pieces of their core locked up for the foreseeable future, and that window of that window is getting closer. These guys are locked up. That means that in this span is when the Red Wings are expected to make waves in the NHL. So that brings me to my next point, Scotty. When it comes to Moritz Seider, what do we expect? What does he need to do, in your opinion, next year, in year 2, year 3, all the way through year 7, to have been worth his weight in gold? That is $8.55 million.
I think he's already worth it. I think if you would have told me his salary last year was 8.5 mil, I would have been like, oh, okay, sweet. Like that. Yeah, he played like it. You know what I mean? I obviously you want just like natural progression. He's still so young. You would love to see him to do that. And I think that a lot of that comes back to what we were talking about and what you brought up a lot in segment 1, right? I mean, if this dude has more favorable deployment and has actually put in situations where he can produce a little bit more offensively, then I think he will. He is unbelievably talented, but he also needs to be the guy that we send out there against the other team's top lines all the time, right? Like I think he needs to be both. And like, I'm expecting a guy that's going to lead the team in time on ice pretty much every single game the rest of the way. Like that's kind of how I view this. This is going to be the anchor. This is going to be the guy that, again, not only is out on the ice against the other team's top offensive line, but in the same breath is also somebody now this year that, as we talked about with Ken Kal yesterday, like we're hoping can be power play one, right? We're hoping that Seider can be a legitimate weapon offensively as well, get some of those assists that walked out the door from Goss despair last year. And obviously, again, also on power play one there, I think the sky is really the limit for him. I am, as we all are, so high on Moritz Seider and what his ceiling could be. And I think that the biggest thing that I want to see out of him is just be the anchor of this team. Go out there and be the guy that's going to lead the team and in time on ice, and that we can use in literally every situation. That was part of Larkin's development too, right? When he first started, he wasn't an all situation player, and slowly over the years worked on his defense, right? Became better and better in different scenarios, and now Larkin has a spot in every single situation. That's kind of what I'm expecting out of Seider as well, but on the blue line.
Yeah, and I mean that brings me to the next point too, right? Like the big thing that Moritz Seider needs to do to be where he's, like you said, he's already worth that contract based on how he performed. I know all the advanced analytics people, and I'm a guy who likes advanced analytics, but I don't think advanced analytics can really account for everything, especially when you're talking about a guy who is defensive, has a defensive mindset. Like he is a two-way defenseman. I don't want to take that away. I'm rooting for power play one this year. But like this is a guy who was asked to carry the burden of the defensive zone for his team pretty much exclusively, along with, whoever was paired with him, like Jake Wallman or Ben Sherratt. So and those metrics don't look favorably on players who are deployed like that. And so it's going to show his advanced analytics, and I'm getting off. But basically, before I get myself on a tangent, I'll stop myself and just be like, when you look at those advanced analytics, they don't tell you the full story and how good he is. You have to watch the games. And that's when you see all the impacts that he has on the ice. And, we were talking about ways he can still grow, right? I think the biggest way he can still grow is something that we've talked about a ton as well. Like, give him the proper usage. I just mentioned in segment one how his usage is the most insane out of anyone in the league in terms of quality of competition. The way to bring him back down to the rest of the pack, because it's not necessarily a brag, but it's also kind of a plea for help. Like, he shouldn't be all alone up there. That shouldn't be reality. He needs to come back down, and the way to solve that isn't to give him less minutes. It's actually to give him more minutes against lesser competition. Put him in situations against easier competition so he can show his stuff, because he does have an offensive edge to him. He put up 42 points last year despite his usage. He put up 50 his rookie season when he was getting used a little bit more loosely because they're trying to figure out his role. Like, this is a guy who's an offensive upside. I looked it up while you were talking there, and last year at 5-on-5 amongst all defensemen, Moritz Seider ranked 110th in time on ice per game played at 5-on-5 out of all defensemen.
Yeah.
And that makes some degree of sense, right? Because he's getting used on both power play and penalty kill. And so if you're out there on special teams a lot, sometimes you'll shave a little bit of your overall ice time away at 5-on-5 to give you a rest. But then you look at his all strengths metrics, right? And you filter that again. And if I hit Control F here and hit search, he's 48th. He's averaging 22 minutes and 21 seconds of ice time per game as this team's number one. And the reason why he can't take on more is because they're only using him in that one type of situation. D-zone starts against the toughest competition. He needs to get up to where guys like Drew Doughty are, or Seth Jones, or Rasmus Dahlin, or Brock Faber, two of his comparables, where they're playing almost 25 minutes a night. And those extra couple minutes have to come on the offensive zone blue line and against competition that isn't Nikita Kucherov or Brad Marchand or Austin Matthews. Give him a time, like if you give him those easier minutes, you're going to see all those advanced analytics improve. You're going to see his points take a step forward while he's still the defensive stalwart that you need him to be. It all comes down to you're giving him true number one deployments, and you're giving him true number one minutes or money. Now give him true number one minutes on top of it. No more of this. The top two pairs get 22 minutes each. He is your number one. Play him like it.
Agreed.
All right. And again, none of that's on Moritz Seider. That's all on his deployment. That's on coaching. That's on how the construction of the roster. So, Scotty, we're going to head to segment 3. We still got a lot to talk about, man. We have to talk about the training camp lines. The Griffins unveiled new uniforms, which I guess can be kind of a fun anecdote at the end. We won't get to quotes. We'll talk about quotes next week. I'm sure we'll have plenty of quotes to go through by then. I know that Kane talked. A couple other players talked as well. I think Christian Fischer did. So we'll talk about that next week. But for the rest of this today, we're going to talk about some training camp lines we saw, as well as the Griffins uniforms. So stay tuned to segment 3 of Locked On Red Wings. Got to talk to you guys today about FanDuel. You heard us talk about it a lot. They are America's #1 sportsbook. Well, we have something a little different for you. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out of market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. Just visit FanDuel.com to download America's #1 sportsbook. Segment 3, Locked On Red Wings podcast. Scotty, the training camp has begun for the Red Wings. Kind of got overshadowed by the Moritz Seider contract, but we saw some lines on day 1 of training camp, and I just want to skip right to where we're back. No, it's more. We're so back now. We're so back.
We are. We're getting training camp lines. We're talking training camp lines on the show, man. We're so back.
Well, and I mostly want to talk about one line because everything else is pretty chalk. It's like what we were expecting and or mirrored what we saw last year. The one line I want to talk about is the one line that I thought made no sense when we discussed it as a hypothetical, and that is Joe Veleno, Jonathan Berggren, and Tyler Motte. What are your thoughts on that line, buddy?
It's just really funny. It made no sense when we talked about it as a hypothetical, and now it's on the ice. Look, I'll say this. I can actually appreciate the thought. I can appreciate the mindset that I think that they are going for, which is we're going to put Veleno 2-way, Motte defense, Berger offense. Right? I mean, like in theory, you can be like, all right, you get a little bit of everything there.
Okay, but the problem... Okay, go ahead, finish.
No. Trust me. The execution of that is obviously a massive question mark. And I do not foresee that line making it out of the preseason. I don't foresee this being a line that we see very much on, when the regular season begins. But this is training camp. Like, this is what training camp is for. You take a bunch of ideas that you have on paper and you throw them out on the ice and you see how they look. I don't think this line will look very well. I think it'll be a short-lived experiment, but I can appreciate the ceiling of the experiment, which is, again, in my head at least, somewhat understandable, even though I don't think it's going to work out.
Right. And at the end of the day, it's training camp, and they're going to do all kinds of different combinations in training camp to find what works best. But Tyler Motte is exclusively a fourth-line penalty-killing defensive forward. Jonathan Berggren, who did have comments, and we'll talk about, again, early next week, we'll talk about Jonathan Berggren's comments. He did work at this offseason and dedicate a lot of his time to getting better defensively, which is exactly the type of thing I do want to hear out of Jonathan Berggren, because I like Jonathan Berggren a lot. Despite how it may sound on this podcast, I actually like him quite a bit. He's a really fun personality. But traditionally, he is a offense-first forward. Those two aren't going to really... Unless Jonathan Berggren is so much better defensively now than he was, in years past, those two it doesn't make a lot of sense that they're going to gel well, right? How are you going to deploy that line? You have a shooter and a playmaker in Jonathan Berggren in the defensive zone, or you have a defense-first oriented forward in the offensive zone. And Joe Veleno's fine. Like, I can see Berggren going with Kopp or Joe Veleno because they're both two-way forwards. They both bring a little bit something different. I think Joe Veleno's a lot faster, which can help facilitate some plays to Jonathan Berggren. I think Andrew Kopp's a better playmaker, which again will, in that regard, help facilitate plays to Jonathan Berggren. But Tyler Motte and Christian Fischer were like the two wingers I thought made the least sense to pair with Jonathan Berggren, which is why I wanted to bring it up. But and that's not a shot at them. Like, they both have their own roles.
No, I get it.
They both have their own roles, and those roles are really important. Like, Christian Fischer was part of that very important shutdown line for the Detroit Red Wings last year. It just doesn't make a lot of sense to put that guy with... I always thought the ideal winger for the bottom six for Jonathan Berggren was Michael Rasmussen.
Right.
And you put either of those two centers, Veleno or Kopp, with them, and it makes a lot of sense. You can rationalize it. You have Rasmussen, who's going to crash the net hard and go for a redirection on shots, who's going to crash the corners and try to win possession and get the puck to Berggren. And then you have either Veleno, who can match Berggren's speed, or Kopp, who can set Berggren up with playmaking ability. And that line and Kopp would get more offensive zone deployments than he did last year on the shutdown line. Same with Rasmussen. So that would obviously no longer be your shutdown line. But then, like, I thought that Rasmussen was the ideal partner on the bottom six. I struggle to see how Motte or Christian Fischer are going to be good candidates to help facilitate the offense that we know Berggren has. Now, that being said, if Nate Danielson, who was playing training camp lines with at least experienced NHL veterans, surprises and makes the team, and he plays a center role, that changes a lot of things, because then you have the capability of maybe having Kopp or Veleno play wing, and that could make your bottom six a lot more electric.
Yeah, I think you move Kopp over to the wing there.
It's tough because Kopp's so good at winning faceoffs. Like, last year, he won like 51%, which is really good for an entire year's worth.
Yeah, oh yeah. Don't.
So it's like,
you think I don't know about faceoff percentage, Brian? You don't know me very well, right?
Yeah. Big Luke Glendening guy over here.
Huge. Oh my gosh, huge, dude. Yeah, where your faceoffs go to die, baby.
But again, all of this is training camp day one.
Day one. Not even
day
like
one.
training camp like a week in. It's day one, so we got plenty of time to figure it out.
Our jobs is to microanalyze every little thing that happens. Doesn't mean that we should take it seriously, though. Right. As far as other training camp things, I think the way it looked like the depth chart was rolling, it was Olimata and Gustafsson on the third pair, and then Hull and Albert Johansson as like the odd men out. But again, training camp day one, that's going to filter itself out. Every other line was pretty much chalk, exactly how we expected. At least as of what Max Boltman was.
But
but he'll be there. Yeah. This is obviously according to Max Boltman, who was reporting because he's been there. Because obviously
Boots
I am
on
not.
Ground,
I am
baby, the GOAT.
Boots on ground. We appreciate it. Every single must follow if you're a Red Wings fan, because his tweets are incredibly valuable. Anyways, the final thing we got to get to today, Scotty, unless you want to talk about anything else from training camp.
No.
The Grand Rapids Griffins unleashed new uniforms, and I feel really bad for the Griffins because they announced they were teasing this for days, literal days, that some mysterious big reveal was going to happen. And then today they tweeted out 2 p.m. And you know what happened at 2 p.m., Scotty? The Red Wings signed Moritz Seider. So I don't think anybody saw that the Grand Rapids Griffins unveiled new uniforms, but we're going to talk about it and shine a little light on it because they, at least in our opinion, are absolute fire. Do people still say that? Absolute fire? Am I still hip?
They're really cool, though.
Oh,
I think the gold is sweet, man. Like, they really... Look at those.
Yeah, dude. And so, like, the big change here, obviously the gold trim is brand new.
Yeah, love it. Absolutely love the gold trim.
You know what's funny is I typically don't like gold, especially like shimmery gold, like the Vegas Golden Knights have. But just having it as an accent on this jersey, I also don't typically like having 4 colors on your jersey. I'm usually like a 3 or less type guy. But I saw these immediately and I was like, yeah, these are amazing. These slap. Do kids say that? Do kids say these slap?
No, that's even worse than fire.
What's the new slang, Scotty?
Whatever you're not saying. They're really good though. Genuinely. Like they're really, really cool. The gold trim, I cannot express enough how awesome I think the gold trim is.
We'll just go back to when I was a kid. These are epic, bro.
Okay.
But
progressively, like linear, like gotten worse, like exactly gotten worse every time.
so besides the gold trim, they've changed like the shoulders too. Typically, last year it was for the home jerseys, the tops of the shoulder were blue like most of the jersey, and then they had a red and white trim, I believe, along the sides of the shoulders. And this year, the top of the shoulders is completely red with a white and gold trim, and that gold trim obviously encapsulates the letters and the numbers as well. You see the gold trim on the bottom stripe. That's pretty much the same besides the gold stripe. You switch on over the white jerseys, it's the same thing, just inverse. You still have the white shoulders with the blue and gold trim and the gold trim on the letters. But it's crazy how that small of a change, that adding that fourth color, that gold trim, which makes a lot of sense because their logo is like 50% gold in reality. Like their logo is gold and white. Pretty much because of the color of the Griffin. It just upgraded the uniform, in our opinion, so much.
Absolutely, man. Yeah, I'm really pumped to see him out on the ice.
Right. I know some people think they're too busy with all those colors, and normally I would agree, but for some reason, and I can't really justifiably explain it, but for some reason these just really pop to me and are eye-pleasing.
I think it's really clean.
Yeah. Scotty, any final thoughts?
I don't think so, man. We ball.
Moritz Seider signed 7 years, $8.55 million per year. He's locked up until he is 30 years old.
We finally just put all this behind us. Like, that's my biggest thing. It's like, golly, we don't have to talk about the offseason anymore. Like, we're officially on just like, let's talk about the regular season, the upcoming year. Let's talk about the upcoming year and whatnot. We don't have to deal with all the off-season shenanigans anymore. It's officially behind us. Summer's over. Let's talk puck, baby.
And just for the record, the Red Wings have about $200,000 in cap space remaining. And as it stands, they are 10th in the league in cap used, cap spent. But that'll change before training camp as well, as like players go on the LTIR and everything. Like the caps are $10 million over right now. Like it's not going to stay that way. So we'll talk again on Monday. Probably training camp news, if not otherwise. So stay tuned for that. Same time, same place. It's your team every day.
Every day.